Hello, fellow movie fans. I'm Lily Percy, and I'll be your guide this week as I talk with Hrishikesh Hirway about the movie that changed his life, You Can Count on Me. Don't worry if you haven't seen it. We're going to give you all the details so you'll follow along. Today's show is sponsored by Talkspace, the online therapy company that lets you message a licensed therapist from anywhere at any time. Therapy has been hugely important in my own life, and I can't imagine how much more I would have used it had I been able to just message a therapist at any time. Well, with Talkspace, therapy is as easy as that. So no commutes, no leaving the office, and more importantly, no judgments. To match with your perfect therapist for a fraction of the price, go to Talkspace.com/PRX and use the code PRX to get $45 off your first month and show your support for This Movie Changed Me.
1, 2, 3, 4.
The most important relationship in my life is the one that I have with my older brother, Juan Marcos. He, in many ways, raised me. He was a father figure to me growing up. And when we first moved to the United States, he introduced me to almost everything. How to ride a bike, A Tribe Called Quest, and how to survive a new country as a kid. We supported each other, and when everything else around us seemed to fail us, we still knew that we had each other. And this is what the movie You Can Count on Me showcases so beautifully. That sibling relationship, that one that you can count on when you can count on no one else in your life.
Do you have everything you need?
I think so.
What are you gonna do?
I don't know, I'll just send her the money, I guess.
Maybe you should stay home for a while.
Yeah, maybe that'd be a good idea.
The brother and sister in You Can Count on Me, Terry and Sammy, are played by Mark Ruffalo and Laura Linney. And their relationship is honest. It is brutally honest at times. Both of them are not perfect people, and in fact, their relationship is at a distance. Terry, Mark Ruffalo's character, is a wanderer. He hasn't quite figured out what his role and his place in life is, and so he's looking for himself. And Sammy, Laura Linney's character, has never left home. She has a son, Rudy, she has a stable job, and yet she's also looking for herself. And that's one of the things that makes the movie stand the test of time, almost 20 years later, is the fact that it depicts this human relationship and bond in a realistic way.
You don't have to say anything, Sammy.
I want you to leave.
What do you mean?
I mean, I don't think you should live here. I don't think you know how to behave around an 8-year-old, and I don't know how to make you stop, so I don't think you should live here. I don't know what else to say.
I don't know how to behave around an 8-year-old.
That's right.
I think you don't know how to behave around an 8-year-old.
Are you out of your mind? Now, just listen to me. No, I may not be the greatest mother in the world, but I'm doing the best I know how, and he doesn't need you to rub his face in shit because you think it's good for him. He's gonna find out the world is a horrible place and that people suck soon enough and without any help from you. Believe me.
The real sibling relationship at the center of You Can Count on Me really struck Hrishikesh Hirway, the host of the podcasts Song Exploder and The West Wing Weekly. It struck him so deeply because he saw himself in Terry, and the closeness of that relationship mirrored the one he had with his own sister, Priya. It's one he hadn't really seen anywhere else.
Till I see you fade away.
I'd like to take you back in time for a minute by asking you to talk about the first time that you saw You Can Count on Me. I'd love for you to close your eyes and think about how old you were, where you were, all of the kind of circumstances that surrounded that first time that you saw the movie.
It was in the late summer of 2001. I was at home in the house that I grew up in Massachusetts, and I was about to leave and move to New York. I was trying to figure out where I was going to go to try and have this career as a film composer, maybe, and continue my life as a musician.
Had you graduated college already?
Yeah, I had graduated college, and I think my family was a little bit concerned about my direction, and I moved back home sort of temporarily and got a job in Massachusetts and was working there and living in my parents' place. My sister was also living there at the time.
And is your sister older or younger?
My sister's older. The age difference between my sister and me is small enough that we could enjoy a lot of things together, and big enough that she kind of, in some ways, was like a third parent for me. She's the person who taught me how to read. She introduced me to so many of the things in my life now that I still love. She was the person who brought those to me at first. And especially once she left for college and I was in high school, we became really close. We started writing letters, and we've really been very close since then. So I put on this movie. I'd heard good things about it, but I didn't know really anything about it. And yeah, at the time, I had been working at this internet company in Massachusetts, and that company, like so many startups around the 2001, were kind of fizzling out. They'd started up really hot, and then they died down. It wasn't a place that I was particularly passionate about. This was just a day job. And anyway, that ended, and I didn't want to look for another job. I just wanted to be a musician. I was temping and doing things here and there, and sometimes I wouldn't work because the temp jobs would actually pay less than if I just collected the unemployment that I was going to get. So it was a strange time, and I was trying to actually figure out moving to LA. I'd wanted to move to LA, but I was just too scared to move to LA.
And in your family, had there ever been an artist before? Because, I mean, your parents are immigrants, right?
Yeah, my parents are from India. And no, the idea of me performing music was kind of foreign enough, let alone trying to make a living doing it.
Yeah.
The idea of going to Hollywood and trying to do something in the movie industry just added even more layers of complexity and foreignness to the whole thing. Wow. Yeah. So my sister came home from work, and it was towards the end of the movie. And I was, 90% of the way done with it. And I loved it so much, and I wanted her to experience it too. So I waved her off. I was like, go somewhere else. Do not have any of this spoiled at all. I want you to see it fresh. And so I waved her away, and she was like, okay. And then so my strongest memory of this is actually the moment after the movie ended. I went into my parents' room where my sister was watching TV, and my sister was there, had kind of quarantined herself, waiting for me to finish the movie, and I was just kind of like marinating in the feelings of what I had just seen, and I sat next to her, and I put my arms around her and gave her a hug, and I think we started talking about it a little bit, but I didn't want to give too much away to her, and then I started crying. And then I started crying like really hard. I think to this day, probably the hardest I've cried as an adult, if you can consider a 21-year-old an adult. And my mom came in, and she was like, "What did you do?" To
exactly, yeah.
Like, what?
The older sibling gets blamed. What happened?
Yeah, exactly. I was just like, I don't know. And she hadn't seen the movie or anything, so she had no idea where this was coming from. But all of these feelings of my own sense of guilt and responsibility, or lack of responsibility to my family, and the duties of being a good child, and all this stuff. The movie kind of crystallized it for me in a way that I don't think it had been before.
So when did your sister watch it?
I think I made her watch it that night.
I was going to say, I would not, she can't wait.
Yeah, I think she watched it that night. And I might have watched it again right then and there with her.
And what was her reaction?
She loved it. I mean, I think in some ways the emotional punch might have been spoiled a little bit by the fact that, I watched it not knowing anything about it.
Exactly.
She watched it being like, oh, this movie just made my brother sob like a baby.
Yeah.
But of course, she loves that movie as well. I told her I felt like this movie was us. I think that's what I said to her. I was like, this is us.
How are you?
Yeah.
Where have you been lately, Terry?
No, I haven't been.
I got a postcard from you from Alaska.
Yeah, I was out there for a little while.
That was in the fall, Terry.
Yeah, no, I've been out of touch.
I was a little worried. I mean...
Yeah, I've been a lot of different places. I was down in Florida for a little while. I was doing some work in Orlando, and man, I've been all over the place.
Well, I wish you'd had just let me know you were okay.
Yeah, I didn't realize it'd been so long.
My sister is sort of the more responsible older sister who's staying in the place where we grew up and kind of carrying on some of the traditions and values and idioms of our parents. And I was the screw up who was doing, following his whims and going off wherever without much heed to responsibility, either personal responsibility or familial responsibility. And so she said that she didn't actually see it quite that way. I mean, she saw a lot of all the sort of positive stuff between the sibling relationship. She's like, yeah, I see that. But I think she thought that I was being too hard on myself, comparing myself to Terry. But that's not how I felt about it. I really felt like I identified with Terry, the good and the bad in him, very deeply.
It's so fascinating because Roger Ebert, in his review of You Can Count on Me, said this. I mean, he just was like a prophet to me in so many ways. And he said this incredible thing. This is not a movie about people solving things. This is a movie about people living day to day with their plans, fears, and desires. And it really struck me because what you're saying, you saw yourself in Terry, who in so many ways is a fuck up, right? Like that's kind of his role. And yet the movie is also about how time and distance, doesn't break this bond that he has with his sister. And even though they're such very different people, it's about the reality of the day-to-day and what happens in their adult lives. And yet, even with all of that, they still don't break that bond.
Yeah. The other thing that this gave voice to is something darker too. Not it wasn't just sweetness and also not just sort of self-directed guilt. One of my favorite moments is when Terry is packing his bag and he is venting at Rudy and he says, I just want to get out of this town, and if you've got any sense, you'll get out of here too.
Rudy, who is like his 8-year-old nephew. It's just crazy the way he talks to him.
And he says, your mom's going to live in this town for the rest of her life. And you know why? Because she thinks she has to. Don't ask me why, but that's the truth. She thinks there's all these things she has to do. But you want to know one thing about your mom? She's a bigger fuck up than I ever was. Because of this sense of obligation. It's not just like, oh, how noble that the older sister is doing these things. To me, there was some sense of, I was a little angry at my sister.
Kind of trapped by expectations too, right?
Yeah. And I get it being, it's an immigrant family that has certain expectations and older daughters in general, especially older daughters, they don't get to have the same kind of freedom that I would get to as the baby boy of the family. But I was upset that my sister wouldn't just reach out and grab whatever she wanted the way that I did. Partly because I felt like she wasn't getting to live the life that she wanted or could have, and also because it ended up imposing this guilt on me that I'm going out and trying to do the thing that I want, and I have to feel bad about it because my sister is sitting here, taking care of the house and taking care of my family just because she thinks that's what she has to do.
Where are you gonna go?
I don't know, I just want to get out of this town. And if you have any sense, when you get old enough, you'll get out of here too. Your mom is going to stay in this town for the rest of her life. And you want to know why? Because she thinks she has to. She thinks there's all these things that she has to do. But I'll tell you one thing about your mom. She's a bigger fuck up than I ever was. I know I messed up, okay? You think I enjoy getting thrown in jail? Because I wanted you to face that prick, your dad, like a little man and show you what kind of guy he is? All right, I got a little carried away, I know it. And I lost my temper just a little bit, which is not the end of the world, by the way, either, just for future reference. And now she's gonna throw me out of my own house because I fucked up a little bit. Which I totally admit. I was totally ready to admit that.
I could go with you.
Well, thanks, man, but I can't really take care of you.
If you're enjoying my conversation with Hrishikesh, or if you love This Movie Changed Me, reach out to us. We're on Facebook and Instagram at This Movie Changed Me, all one word, and Twitter at TMCM Podcast. Let us know what movies changed you, what you're connecting with on the show, or what you wish we'd do differently. We always love hearing from you. Support for This Movie Changed Me comes from Audible. They have the largest selection of audiobooks on the planet. And the audiobook that changed my life is Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run. Bruce is one of my heroes, and I loved being able to listen to him in his own words, at his most vulnerable and intimate. Right now, Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. So go to audible.com/thismovie, all one word, or text this movie to 500-500 to get started. Once again, that's audible.com/thismovie, or message this movie to 500-500 to get started.
You only come around at night. Well, I really should have known.
Yeah, it's fascinating the kind of hopes and expectations that our families have for us, and then that we have for each other as siblings. I mean, one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when Terry first comes back to their hometown and he meets his sister Sammy at the restaurant. And I guess we should say that one of the reasons why they're so close is because they both lost their parents when they were kids. Their parents were killed in a car accident. And so they grew up really only having each other as the family unit. And so as a result, that bond that they already had was made even closer. So it's very clear Terry travels all the time. He's kind of this wanderer and a fuck up, as we've said. And, you know, he meets Sammy after a while at this restaurant, and it's really awkward. And it's awkward because she's so excited, and he's there really just to borrow money and to leave. And it just reminds me, too, of what can happen in sibling relationships, which is what happens when you're no longer living in the same house and time and distance kind of start to pull you apart, and you're just really struggling to hold on to that dynamic that you had and not really losing that. And I just wondered, you know, how you and your sister have dealt with that kind of expectation of each other and how you've allowed each other to grow together.
The scene that breaks my heart early on in the movie is when you see Laura Linney, when Sammy gets a letter from Terry and she has a filing cabinet and there's a file that says Terry correspondence. Mm-hmm. Because you immediately, you know that he is not saving letters that he's getting back from her.
Yeah,
he's
exactly.
Basically living out of a backpack. And just that shot of Terry correspondence, that really crushed me. I think I have tried really hard to not be that version, to not be the fuck up, to sort of be there for my sister. I don't think that she's never, ever, ever made me feel like I wasn't holding up my end of the bargain or anything like that. But she said something about how at that time she just always wanted to feel like whatever I was doing or wherever I was going, that there was this like safe place for me, you know, to come back to. I think I have always felt this tremendous debt to my sister. I think because of that. You know, there's some things that you can't repay when you're the younger sibling. You know, like I said, my sister taught me how to read. There isn't really any kind of way to repay something like that. Yeah. It's a relationship that is just born of inequity, and I'm just we're never gonna really be on even footing. No. I just felt like my sister was there for me, you know, in ways that my parents couldn't be, not because they didn't want to be or something, but just because there was a cultural gap, you know, in addition to the generational gap that's in every family, there's a cultural gap. Yeah, that existed not just between our parents and us, but also between us and other American kids that I was friends with. Yeah. You know, they couldn't relate to that cultural gap with their parents. They could, you know, it was just something sometimes I felt like my sister was the only person who really understood all of this stuff. Yeah. I don't know. She just made things easier for me. And even watching the movie yesterday just brought all of that stuff flooding back.
Yeah, I totally relate to what you're saying because I think there is something that happens for the older sibling. It's almost like a translation My parents are Colombian. We were born in Colombia. My brother came when he was 10 and I was 4. And he was in so many ways my parent. But I think there's also that thing that happens with immigrant parents where the sibling that is learning first has to teach the younger sibling and kind of cradles you and really protects you in ways that you can never pay back. Like you're saying, you could never pay that back. It reminds me so much of the last scene in the movie, which for me has only become more resonant as I've gotten older and my brother has gotten older. It's the scene where Sammy asks Terry, what's going to happen to you? Yeah. And Terry says, nothing too bad. But I got to tell you, Sammy, it's really good to know wherever I am and whatever stupid shit I'm doing that you're back at my home rooting for me. Ugh.
Yeah.
That scene is so heartbreakingly beautiful.
Yeah. My sister used to, like sometimes I'd come to visit her and in her car she'd be listening to my CD.
Oh.
And it just, I always felt like she was my biggest fan. Not in a cheesy way or anything, because my parents, they would try and support me and stuff, but even they wouldn't.
They wouldn't get it, right? It's not their world.
Yeah, the lyrics and things like that. Yeah, she would appreciate it. I felt like she was back home rooting for me, and yeah, that scene crushes me. Plus, also, this is one of the things I love about this movie is the title and this scene and how, they get there without ever saying
They never say, they allude to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Remember what we used to say to each other?
Exactly. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Yeah. It reminds me of this other film critic, David Edelstein, said in his review in Slate that when people open their mouths, the characters in these movies, what comes out is never a definite expression of character. It's an awkward compromise between how they feel and what they're able to say, or how they feel and what they think they should say, or how they feel and what will best conceal how they actually feel. There's always so much that's not being said that is right there, and it doesn't even get expressed in words, but you feel it.
Yeah.
But I couldn't stay here, Sammy. I don't want to live here. But I'll keep in touch, and I will be back because I want to see you, and I want to see Rudy. We'll have Christmas together. How's that, huh? We'll have Christmas together. Come on, Sammy. You can trust me. Come on, Sammy. Look at me. Look at me. Hey, Sammy. Remember when we were kids? Remember what we always used to say to each other? Of course I do. Remember when we were kids?
Something that I wonder about is how this movie actually helped you, and maybe as you've gotten older and watched it again and again, how it's helped you to reconcile your own sense of responsibility with your family. And I know that was something you talked about. It made you feel guilty, this idea of you going off and pursuing this career as an artist, as a musician. And I wonder how it's helped you reconcile that.
I think Terry has been a kind of, his character has been kind of a warning for me, a cautionary tale. This character feels so much like me, and maybe a version of me, like a there but for the grace of God go I kind of version of me.
Yeah.
And I think it's, for better or for worse, I end up trying very hard to justify the choices that I've made to my family. I think, we're now past the point where they're worried about me. They don't question the decisions that I've made or anything like that, for a long time. But I think I feel an extreme pressure to show them, almost on like a weekly basis. I tend to check in with my parents to give them a progress report. One, because they want to hear from me, but also I think I tend to try and show, hey, this is happening and this is happening and this is happening. So look, you still don't have to worry about me. I'm still like, these are interesting things that are happening to my life, or that are happening in my life because of the choices that I made, not despite them.
Yeah. And your sister has your back and supports you in that too, I'm sure.
Yeah, she still is, I think, my number one fan. And it means so much to me.
A 1, 2, a 1, 2.
Hrishikesh Hirway is a force to be reckoned with. He hosts the podcasts Song Exploder and The West Wing Weekly. He also writes music with the band Moors, and by himself as the 1 AM Radio. And if that's not enough, he just scored the music for the Netflix original series, Everything Sucks. Next time, we're going to be talking about the Coen brothers' cult classic, The Big Lebowski, which turns 20 this year. You've got 2 weeks to find it before our next conversation, and I highly recommend you get yourself a White Russian for when you hang out with the dude. Special shout out this week to Jules Yen for her Apple Podcast review. She says we're a welcome respite when she just can't take any more depressing situations from other podcasts, and calls us solid goodness in her ears. We want to be solid goodness in more people's ears, so subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. This Movie Changed Me is produced by Maya Terrell, Chris Heagle, Tony Lee Yu, and Marie Sambalay, and is an On Being Studios production. I'm Lily Percy, and I have to go call my brother and say thank you.